Some wounds do not bleed, but every time you touch them, the pain resurfaces as vividly as the first day. I sat in a familiar coffee shop, staring at a cup of latte gone cold in front of me, my hands gently rubbing the sides of the cup, searching for the last traces of warmth. If someone had asked me when I realized I had to change my life, it must have been at this moment, when I saw clearly that everything I once trusted was nothing more than an illusion. My name is Delaney Rowe, and this is the story of how betrayal pushed me to the bottom, and how I chose to rise again, quietly but unmistakably, with a comeback no one could deny. I was born in Des Moines, a small city where news traveled faster than the wind, and a handshake could tell you everything about a person. After college, I found my calling in creative media, specifically emotional marketing for local brands. My first job was at a modest agency called Lumina Creative, where I started as an intern and slowly worked my way into a full-time position. Lumina was not a big place, but it was where I poured all my dreams of starting a career. Every project, every strategy, every campaign felt like carving a piece of my soul, as if working hard enough would inevitably bring recognition. In those early years, I worked under the guidance of Malcolm Thompson, the only person at Lumina who truly saw my potential. Malcolm was not the type who cared for flashy presentations or polished strategies. He believed in emotional marketing, in starting every connection by understanding people. I learned more from brief hallway conversations with him than from any formal training session. Under his mentorship, I quickly became one of the hidden architects behind Lumina's most successful campaigns, though my name rarely appeared in the internal newsletters. I did not think much of it at first. As long as the project succeeded, I told myself. It did not matter who got the credit, but things began to shift when Kalista, the so-called golden girl of the company, started paying attention to my work. Kalista came from a well-connected family, closely tied to Lumina's biggest clients. She was polished, always managing to appear at the right moment and bask in the spotlight. Initially, I brushed it off. Success, I thought, was a collective effort. But soon, my ideas began appearing on Kalista's presentation slides, sometimes almost word for word, the only difference being whose name was attached to them. The feeling of being robbed did not hit like a slap. It seeped in slowly, like cold rain soaking through your clothes, numbing yet relentless. I kept my head down, believing that hard work would eventually be seen. I was wrong. One Friday afternoon, the entire company gathered in the conference room to announce the new creative director. I sat quietly in the back row, hope filling every corner of my chest. I had spent 3 years building successful campaigns, ones praised by clients and profitable for the company. I believed, for once, the effort would be recognized. When the CEO's voice rang out, I held my breath. But the name they called was not mine. It was Kalista. She walked to the stage, her golden hair catching the lights, her smile carefully measured between humility and triumph. As she took the microphone and thanked every member of the team by name except mine, I felt the air drain from the room. I clapped along like everyone else, but inside, I was hollow. After the ceremony, Malcolm found me in the hallway, his eyes filled with a sorrow he could not hide. "I tried my best," he said softly, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "But sometimes, around here, work is not just about work." I understood immediately. In this world, talent was not enough. You needed strong connections, backroom handshakes, the kind of cocktail parties where I always felt like an outsider. You needed the kind of sweet scars I had never learned how to inflict. I swallowed the bitterness and kept working. I told myself promotions were not everything, that passion mattered more than titles. But things only worsened. with her new authority. Kalista began restructuring the department. Projects I once managed were reassigned. Meetings I once attended now moved on without me. I became a shadow in a place that had once felt like a second home. The final blow came on a Monday morning when I received an email from HR. It was curt, detached, informing me that my position had been eliminated as part of the restructuring. No warning, no apology. I was laid off like an extra number on a spreadsheet, carrying a cardboard box with a few personal items. I walked out of the building and saw Kalista down the hallway, phone in hand, a smirk playing on her lips. I understood then. This was not restructuring. This was elimination. I drove aimlessly through familiar streets, unsure where to go. Memories of sleepless nights finishing proposals, of brainstorming sessions fueled by dreams, played like a slow, silent film in my mind. I had trusted that company, had trusted my belief in loyalty and hard work. Now, all that was left was debris, returning to my tiny apartment. I sat on the cold, tiled floor, the late afternoon sun cutting slanted beams across the room. The phone remained silent, no messages of comfort, no colleagues reaching out. Those who once shouted teamwork over sandwiches had fallen silent. Instinctively, I unlocked my phone and opened social media. There, Kalista was already posting photos, celebrating the new era of the creative team, glasses of champagne gleaming in golden light. I was not in the frame. No one mentioned me. I had been erased from the story, as if I had never existed. It was not just a job I had lost. It was the faith I had poured into what I thought was real. The bonds I believed in had shattered like thin glass at the slightest touch. That night, with only the hum of the air conditioner filling the empty room, a message popped up on my phone. It was from my mother, Vera. Just a few words. I heard you lost your job. Maybe you should come home. Find something easier. I stared at the message, the weight sinking deep into my chest. Not encouragement, not concern, just a quiet reminder that I had failed, that I had become a burden. I turned off my phone and lay in the dark, letting the silence envelop me. It felt as if the entire world had conspired to turn its back on me. What remained of the once solid ground under my feet was now nothing but fractured fragments. I do not know how long I lay there. I only remember that when I opened my eyes. It was morning, a pale morning, with sluggish light filtering through the curtains. I sat up, my mind a blank slate. Somewhere deep inside, a part of me still refused to give up, but the rest only wanted to disappear. When faith is broken, you realize that what remains is not rage. It is an unbearable emptiness that chills you to the bone. There are mornings when everything around you remains unchanged, yet you know deep down you are no longer the person you were yesterday. I sat silently by the window, a cold cup of coffee resting on the table, my finger absent-mindedly tracing circles on the dark wooden surface. The small apartment no longer felt like a refuge. It had become a sealed box, trapping every failure, every scratch on my pride that I had yet to figure out how to mend. Yet amid the long, frozen silence, a fragile thought began to flicker inside me, faint but steady, like the first flame in a freezing night if this world had no place for me. Maybe it was time to create one of my own. Starting a business had never been part of my life plan, but at that moment, it was no longer a choice. It was inevitable. I took the first steps quietly, like someone relearning how to walk after an accident. No companion, no cheering crowd, only myself and the long, empty days ahead. I spent entire days hunched over an old laptop, searching through freelance platforms for any project, drafting proposals in the sharpest and most honest English I could muster. I no longer dreamed of prestigious contracts or celebrated clients. I only needed a beginning, any beginning. One late afternoon, when the room was already dim, I received my first response. A small cafe in the suburbs needed an emotional marketing campaign to attract local customers. The pay was modest, barely enough for a simple dinner. But to me then, it felt like a rope pulling me out of the abyss. I threw myself into the project like a drowning man clutching at driftwood. In the days that followed, I barely left the house. I rebuilt the entire campaign from customer psychology analysis to visual design and content creation, inspecting every detail meticulously. I applied everything I had learned at Lumina Creative, combined with the hard-earned lessons from my own experiences, and for the first time, it was not to serve someone else's name. It was for myself. When the campaign launched, the cafe's revenue nearly doubled within a month. The owner sent me a short message, just 2 words, "Thank you," along with a small bonus. I sat frozen in front of the screen, my hands trembling for one simple reason. For the first time since the fall, I saw that I still had real value. Bit by bit, I began to fill the void inside with these small projects. A local flower shop wanted to build a holiday brand campaign. A yoga center needed to reposition its image. These orders were small and the pay insignificant. Yet each completed project felt like laying another brick in the foundation I was rebuilding. I did not dare to dream of a full-fledged company yet. I only knew that every day needed to be better than the last. In one rare phone call with Malcolm, he spoke in a voice as warm and aged as a glass of vintage wine. "Delaney, emotional marketing has never been just a tactic. It is how you turn your scars into stories and use them to connect with others carrying their own." Those words felt like a medicine, not to heal, but to remind me that the game was not over. I began drafting the idea for a project of my own, something beyond the scattered freelance gigs, a community built for small businesses struggling to find their voice amidst the noise and falsity of modern marketing, a place where true emotional marketing had space to breathe, where real stories could touch customers instead of hollow slogans. I spent sleepless nights mapping out strategies, building financial plans, analyzing the market. Every word I typed felt like chiseling away at the wall that separated me from freedom. But not every day was filled with light. Some mornings I woke paralyzed by doubt. Every thought, every breath gnawed by self-questioning. In those moments, I would open the small box that held my old notes, rereading every slip of paper Malcolm had once handed me, each carrying a heavy but steady truth. The great ones are not those who never fall, but those who know how to rise without needing anyone to witness it. I reminded myself that every fall was a necessary part of reclaiming lost faith. One of the greatest challenges came when I least expected it, on an early autumn day, when the sidewalks were just beginning to turn gold with fallen leaves. I received a job offer from a mid-sized marketing firm through an acquaintance. They needed a creative lead for a new department. The salary they offered was attractive, enough to stabilize my life easily, for a brief moment. I considered saying yes, but as I read through the project list, I noticed Kalista's name among their priority clients. It turned out she had expanded her career into brand consultancy and now wielded influence over much of the local market. I sat for a long time staring at the unsent email, my mind waging a quiet battle within. Accepting the offer would mean returning under the shadow of the very person who had once pushed me to the bottom. It would mean that any success I achieved afterward might still be credited to her. I thought of the night I had walked out of Lumina Creative in silence, the blank stares of my colleagues, the cold message from my mother. If I gave up now, every sleepless night, every patched-up project would have been for nothing. In the end, I closed the laptop and chose to walk away, not with a dramatic speech, not with confrontation, but with the quiet resolve of someone who knew their worth no longer needed anyone's approval. Turning down the offer did not magically solve my financial problems. I still lived frugally, counting every penny, sometimes forced to choose between a nutritious meal or paying another month of hosting fees for the community website I was building. Yet I never regretted it, because for the first time in years, every step I took was for myself, not to please anyone else. And slowly, quietly, the seeds I planted began to sprout. A group of small business owners sought me out for consulting. A local workshop invited me to speak about emotional marketing. My personal blog gained followers each day, not because of hollow promises, but because of the real stories I shared about betrayal and success through perseverance. The day Aaron, an old friend from a community project, called to tell me that the Embrace Iowa Fund was seeking new startups to support. I knew I was ready to turn to the next chapter, yet I also understood that the real trials were still waiting just ahead. There are moments in life when just a single blink can change everything. I sat in the corner of a small cafe downtown, the soft golden light reflecting on the faces passing by, while I held my laptop close, fingers tightening around a cold cup of coffee. On the screen, an email from the Embrace Iowa Fund stood clear. "We are deeply impressed with your community project. Please attend the pitching session on the 25th of this month." I read those words over and over before I dared to believe they were real. 3 months of pouring every last ounce of energy, every long night spent building this plan, had finally brought me to the first open door since the collapse. But life is rarely simple, especially when the past clings like stubborn mud that refuses to be washed away. The pitching day was held in a luxurious office building, the kind I had only ever passed by from a distance. I prepared everything carefully, from a simple but neat outfit to every slide in my presentation, stepping into the elevator. My chest tightened at the sight of a familiar group, among sharp suits and expensive dresses. Kalista stood out like a beacon, laughing and chatting confidently with the organizers, her eyes gleaming with assurance. I realized immediately that she, too, had her own project, and she was also here to secure funding. For a fleeting second, I wondered if the universe was playing some cruel joke on me, but I pulled myself back quickly. This was not a contest between me and her. This was about affirming my true worth. The pitching session took place in a small auditorium under the soft white lights. The judges lined up neatly in front. I quietly watched the other teams present when Kalista took the stage. Her presentation sparkled with polished charts and flawless language about community goals. Yet as I listened, something felt disturbingly familiar. The terms about emotional marketing, the strategies for building brand narratives rooted in authenticity, all echoed the ideas I had once shared with her during those old brainstorming sessions. A chill spread through my chest, but I only tightened my fist, forcing myself to stay composed. When it was my turn, I stepped onto the stage under the pale lights, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room. I had no dazzling numbers, no glittering slides. I only had a true story. I spoke about the journey of small businesses, about the isolation honest entrepreneurs faced in a market flooded with hollow marketing campaigns. I spoke about why emotional marketing was not a trick, but a salvation. I looked straight into the judge's eyes and said that sometimes the most ordinary dreams deserve to be heard the loudest. When I finished, the room fell silent for a few long seconds that felt like centuries, before a round of applause broke out. It was not thunderous, but it was sincere enough that I knew I had reached them. As I stepped off the stage, I did not look toward Kalista, but I could feel the cold stare burning into my back. I did not need to turn to know it was filled with both contempt and a creeping fear. A few days later, when the results were announced, I received the call. My project was awarded a grant of $50,000 along with a year-long mentorship opportunity. I sat frozen in the empty room, clutching the phone, not overwhelmed with joy, but rather with a quiet relief, as if a burden I had carried for years had finally been set down. I did not post anything about it on social media, nor did I share the news with my family. I knew if I did, my mother, Vera, would only send a cold message like, "Finally made something of yourself." And Kalista would find a way to spin my story into her own narrative. I chose silence instead, and silence became the shield to protect the true value I had fought so hard to reclaim. But good news never stays hidden for long in a small town. Just a week later, I received a message from Emily Rivers, an old friend from high school who had once slipped out of family gatherings because she could not stand the fake atmosphere. "Delaney, I heard Kalista is spreading rumors that you stole her idea to get the funding." The message was brief, but heavy enough to keep me sitting by the window for a long time, staring into my cold coffee. I had known this would happen. I knew Kalista could not bear the thought that the person she had once pushed to the bottom had made a stunning comeback. Yet life, sometimes, has its own quiet fairness. One afternoon, while editing content for the new community website, I received an anonymous email. Attached were scans of a contract Kalista had signed with a major PR firm, stating that all campaign content must be original and unpublished. Alongside was a document comparing her pitch to a blog post I had publicly shared 2 years ago, highlighting the sections she had copied almost word for word. I sat frozen in front of the screen, my hands trembling slightly. This was not what I wanted. I had never intended to expose her. I only wanted to live my own life, but I also understood that if I stayed silent, the truth would continue to be distorted. I sent the documents to the Embrace Iowa committee, along with a brief explanation. No anger, no accusations, only facts. I left the rest for them to decide. A week later, the news broke like a quiet bomb in the local media. Kalista was accused of idea theft. Her contract with the PR firm was canceled, and more importantly, she was removed from the funding program. Small articles began to appear, not screaming headlines, but enough to fracture the once perfect image of the golden girl of marketing. I did not celebrate. I did not gloat. I only felt an odd stillness inside, as if justice, when true, never needed to shout to be heard. Late one night, while preparing slides for my first official project presentation, my phone rang with an unknown number. It was Kalista. I let it ring until it died out. I knew she would try to deny, to beg, or to blame. But this time, I had learned that I no longer needed to hear anything in order to forgive, or to prove anything to anyone. I only needed to keep walking the path I had chosen, a path built on truth, patience, and relationships founded on trust, not pretense. Outside the window, the autumn wind rustled through the trees, the leaves singing a slow, steady song. I sat quietly in my small room, knowing that though many challenges still lay ahead, at least now, I was standing on the strongest ground I had ever known. There are mornings so ordinary they seem almost trivial, yet it is within that very ordinariness that a life quietly shifts direction. I sat on the balcony of my old apartment, a warm cup of coffee in my hands, the mist softening the harsh outlines of the gray city ahead. The autumn wind played with my hair, carrying a strange emptiness, as if all the old remnants were slowly being swept away. I no longer felt bitterness when thinking about Kalista or the company I once worked for. That lingering sadness had given way to a quiet stillness, a space wide enough for me to hear the voice within. And within that silence, for the first time, I realized I was ready to move forward, not to avenge anyone, but to build something greater than any wound ever inflicted. In the days that followed, I threw myself into work as if time itself was chasing me. The community project I had long nurtured, centered around emotional marketing, began to take shape in reality. I published the first article on the website, telling the stories of small businesses that had been rejected, overlooked, but had refused to give up. Every post carried real values, charting the journey of reaching customers' hearts rather than chasing hollow glories. I ran no ads, spent no money on flashy promotions. I relied only on the power of true stories. And then something miraculous happened. Shares grew each day, each week. Young entrepreneurs reached out for advice. Local organizations invited me to speak. It all began with a simple click, yet the impact reached far beyond anything I could have predicted. One afternoon, while editing content for the first workshop, I received an email from Embrace Iowa. They invited me to join an intensive program for young founders, offering access to angel investors and top mentors in the creative industry. I sat still in front of the screen, my hand trembling slightly. This was not just an opportunity, it was a gateway, a milestone I had never dared to dream of back when I cowered in the shadows after my fall at Lumina Creative. I accepted with a quiet gratitude. Without fanfare, I knew this comeback was not born of a lucky break, but of every drop of sweat, every sleepless night, every quiet endurance when everything seemed set against me. When the training program began, I entered a completely different world. Here, no one cared how badly you had failed before. No one asked about your background or your family name. They only looked at what you could do now, at how you could turn a fragile idea into something that touched real life. Each session, each mentoring meeting, broke me out of my old comfort zones. I learned to pitch concisely, to read the psychology of investors, to build a customer ecosystem based not just on products, but on stories. It was here that I finally understood emotional marketing was not just a technique, it was a philosophy, a way for even the smallest people to create something truly significant. But the further I moved forward, the more the past tried to pull me back. One late evening, as I was preparing slides for a major pitch, a strange message arrived. It was from my mother, Vera, just a few words. Never forget who raised you. I sat for a long time in the dark room, the blue light of the laptop casting soft shadows across my face. There was no anger, no resentment, only a vague sadness. No matter how far you go, no matter what you build, the scars left by broken bonds still pulse quietly beneath every layer of success. I did not reply to the message. Instead, I added another page to my pitch, emphasizing that my project was not just a business, but a journey to rebuild lost faith, a testament that someone once betrayed could rise again, not through hatred, but by creating real value for the world. I knew that when I spoke these words, there would be people quietly nodding, people who once sat alone in a dark room too, clutching their phones, wondering if anyone ever truly saw them. The final pitch took place on a Saturday morning. I stood before the panel of investors, my heartbeat slow but steady. There were no dazzling stage lights, no dramatic background music, only me and the most sincere words I had shaped over many long months. I was not begging them to save a dream. I was inviting them to walk beside me because I knew I was building something real, something that could truly touch lives. When the presentation ended, the room held a long, deep breath before a ripple of applause filled the air. I stepped down from the stage, not waiting for the results, not asking whether I would win, because for me, the very act of standing there, telling my true story, was already the greatest victory. That afternoon, I wandered through the empty streets, my heart light as a kite floating lazily in the wind. I knew that whatever the outcome, I had officially made my comeback, in a way no one could deny, not through tricks, not through polished images, but through unbroken perseverance, through true emotional marketing, and through a quiet, unwavering belief in my own worth. When I returned to my apartment, a new email notification popped up. A major investor had agreed to fund my project for the next 3 years, enough to turn my once small dream into a full ecosystem for honest businesses. I collapsed onto the floor, my hands cradling my head, emotions surging, but never spilling into tears, because in that moment, I knew I had truly crossed over. I no longer needed to prove anything to those who once abandoned me. Outside the window, a light rain began to fall. I let the raindrops drum against the glass in a steady, soft rhythm, like whispers in the night. I knew the journey ahead would be long, filled with new trials and many more sleepless nights. But this time, I would keep walking, not for validation, but for myself, because I had finally learned that true value never needs to shout to be seen. It simply needs to keep burning quietly, like a small, steadfast flame against the coldest winds. There are victories that do not need fireworks or roaring applause. Sometimes they come on an ordinary morning when you look into the mirror and see yourself, unhidden and unashamed. I stood in my new office, a small space flooded with natural light, its white walls covered with maps of the communities we were helping to revive. In the warm air and the soft hum of a working printer, I felt as if I were breathing a new kind of life, a rhythm no longer dependent on fake nods or hollow praises. My small company, Heartline Media, was now officially born, a startup focused on emotional marketing tailored for small businesses and nonprofit organizations, places where real stories deserve to be heard and shared. There was no grand opening, no champagne toasts, no glittering backdrop, only genuine people arriving to share their dreams, signing small contracts filled with great hopes. Our first client was a local bookstore on the verge of closing, unable to compete with the giants of e-commerce. My team and I helped them rebuild their brand story, organized community reading sessions, and connected them with true book lovers. Their revenue increased by 70% within just 4 months. Every day as I stepped into our small office, I did not think about Kalista, nor Lumina Creative, nor the days of rejection. I only thought about the things that were growing from the barren soil where I had once been cast down. Still, old wounds sometimes throb unexpectedly. One late autumn afternoon, while reviewing the financial reports, I stumbled upon a small article online. Kalista had officially exited the marketing industry, closing her firm after a series of scandals involving idea theft and failed major collaborations. The article did not use dramatic language. It simply listed the events, the figures, and the cold comments from former partners. I sat silently, tapping my fingers lightly on the edge of the chair. There was no gloating, no cheap satisfaction, only a deep, distant note, like the faint tolling of a bell marking the close of an old chapter. Those who had once turned their backs on me began to reappear sporadically. One morning, while organizing documents in the meeting room, I received a message from Aunt Mara. She inquired about my work and hinted at inviting me to consult for the family company. I read her message with a faint smile, neither bitter nor cold, just with the clarity of someone who understands that sometimes The hands reaching out are not there to lift you, but merely to catch a bit of light for themselves. I did not reply. I neither needed to take revenge on them nor to reject them. I only needed to keep walking on my path, one built painstakingly from the true values I had reclaimed. Word about Heartline Media spread faster than I expected. Local newspapers began publishing stories about our successful campaigns, about how we used emotional marketing to connect people with people rather than brands with wallets. Invitations to speak at conferences increased, and collaboration requests piled up week after week. But I remained cautious. I handpicked every partner, every project. I did not chase after glamorous offers, nor did I let myself be drawn into the power games that had once crushed me. I built Heartline the way one would build a home, brick by brick, steadily and patiently. One day, Malcolm Thompson called me. His voice, warm and slightly emotional, carried no pretense. "I am proud of you, Delaney," he said, "not because you succeeded, but because you did not lose yourself during your darkest days." I leaned back in my chair, gazing at the pale gray sky outside. His words felt like a silent milestone, a quiet affirmation that I had made a comeback no one could deny, no one could take away. One late evening, after cleaning up the office, I lingered before the wall where the first photograph of Heartline Media hung. It was a photo from our first workshop, showing people crammed onto plastic chairs, each face lit with a fragile but persistent hope. I wondered if, had I surrendered back then, had I accepted those easy offers for a safe position, would I ever have seen this moment? And I knew then that choosing to quietly stand up and walk on my own had been the most beautiful form of revenge for all those who had once doubted my worth. The day I received the Midwest Changemakers Award for Community Contribution, I wore a simple black dress, no elaborate accessories, walking onto the stage to accept the award. I did not search the crowd for familiar faces. I only looked straight ahead, where the people who had stayed through the hard times were smiling back at me in my brief speech. I made no mention of those who had betrayed me or of old wounds. I spoke only about the power of believing in true value, about the perseverance required when every door seemed to slam shut. Not everyone will see you the first time. I ended my speech with a calm voice, but that does not mean you do not exist. Build your life as you would build a home. No matter who comes or who leaves, that home will remain standing, steadfast against the winds. As I stepped off the stage, the sound of applause trailing behind me, I knew I had closed a long journey, not with anger, not with confrontation, but with peace. Those who had tried to erase me had lost their place by their own hands. I had not needed to lift a finger. Outside the conference center, the autumn night stretched across the sky, deep and black, with tiny stars flickering like whispered promises. I stood there, letting the cold wind wash over me, exhaling a long, steady breath, not a sigh of regret, but a breath that released everything that had once held me captive. Perhaps in the end, revenge is not about making others hurt as much as you did. It is about living a life that you can be proud of when you look back. A life where every scar lights the path ahead, not one used to curse the darkness, and perhaps, in the stillness of long nights, those who once denied me would have no choice but to face a simple truth. I had become something they could never stop.